Tim can't help us a lick. He can't play dead anymore. He just comes for the free lunch.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, on Instagram the same, and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We're going to be looking at just another comfortable, easy victory for the Golden State Warriors in Game 3, previewing that Game 4, and also having a look at the Boston and Cleveland Game 3 now that we know for sure that Isaiah Thomas will be out. So,
let's get to it.
Didn't need that little guitar solo there. Let's get to it indeed, Mr. Bolton. Let's recap Game 3 first. There was no Kawhi Leonard for the Spurs. They lost David Lee early on with a knee injury. He played just the 2 minutes, and the Warriors were without Zaza Pachulia. So a lot of that stuff we talked about yesterday was obviously going to play a big part in this game with those absences, and it didn't really, as I say, it didn't matter for the Warriors that Zaza was out like no shit. Obviously, Kawhi being out is the big deal, and the Warriors got the comfortable victory 120-108 as we all expected, and they now head into Game 4 looking to sweep this series and close it out. And at this point, I would be very, very surprised if both David Lee and Kawhi Leonard play in Game 4. So when we look at the preview later on in the show, I'll be approaching it in that way, assuming that Kawhi is out and that David Lee is out. I think that Zaza might get back, but who knows with that one. Obviously, the bigger story is going to be what happens with the Spurs, and I just can't see Kawhi or David Lee being ready to play in 2 days' time for Game 4. Lee, he's going to be having an MRI tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to this. He left the court and wasn't unable to take his free throw, so immediately ruled out for the game. So it doesn't look great for Lee, especially when you've got less than 48 hours until Game 4 tips off. So I just don't expect we'll be seeing David Lee out on the court for that one, and that's fine because he doesn't really do much anyway. Let's look at this from the Warriors' point of view. Their main stars didn't need to play huge amounts of minutes. Steph only saw the 34. He did have some early foul trouble. 21 points with 6 steals and 5 rebounds for Steph. Durant did play the 38 minutes, so that was good if you did happen to have him in lineups. 33 and 10 with 3 triples, 4 assists, 2 steals and a block. So a very well-rounded performance there from Kevin Durant. While Draymond had 10, 7 and 7 with a pair of blocks in his 34 minutes and hit 4 of his 6 shot attempts. Klay Thompson at least got something going. We haven't been able to say that for him much in these playoffs. 17 points with 6 boards. In his 36 minutes, shot 47% as well. The big surprise, I guess, was, or maybe not a huge surprise, but JaVale McGee, who started in place of Zaza Pachulia. He played 13 minutes. He had 16 points. He had 1 rebound, though. He had 1 block. And oddly enough, he didn't beat 5x value on FanDuel. He came in at 4.5x value, and that was something that I did talk about yesterday. That Zaza, that Zaza's absence should allow JaVale McGee to see a bigger chunk of minutes, but his salary at $4,000 meant that his ability to exceed the value there was going to be challenging, and he didn't do it. 16 points in 13 minutes is great, but at $4,000 he needed to do more than that, and he didn't. So picking JaVale wouldn't have actually, and as odd as this sounds, putting Dwayne Dedmon as your center on FanDuel was a much better result. Dedmon, who played only 7 minutes in the second half, and I'm going to get onto that a little bit later, he returned 6.4x value at $2,000. McGee at $4,000, 4.5. So it just goes to show that certain things, now the Dedmon one's probably a little bit fluky, but we know that when he plays, the numbers come. It took until the fourth quarter until we saw Dedmon into the game. It just shows that some of these things is as much to do with opportunity as salary as well. So McGee coming into a better situation didn't necessarily translate into an absolute must-play guy just because of the elevated salary that he was sitting at, and that's exactly where we saw it. We saw Matt Barnes for a couple of minutes early on. I've got absolutely no idea why. 4 minutes for him 1 steal, nothing else, while Pat McCaw continued to look like the better player, and he had 6 points in 11 minutes with 2 steals. Andre Iguodala returned. He did very little, 19 minutes for Iguodala, 2 points with 2 rebounds. His price continues to be too high from a DFS point of view, and it looks like they're just going to ease him through this series until they actually need him against Cleveland, and we'll see limited minutes from Iguodala in Game 4. I would guess at this point that we won't be seeing 30-32 from him. It's more going to be 22 to 25 sort of zone for Iguodala as they push him through this recovery from that knee injury. Let's talk about the Spurs. They made a change to their starting lineup, one I can fully get behind. You know I'm a big Kyle Anderson fan, and he started over Pau Gasol. We talked before this series started that playing Pau against the Warriors was a bad idea. He struggled in the 3 regular season games against them this year, struggled in a massive, massive way. And playing him alongside LaMarcus Aldridge in this series was never going to go well, and it didn't. Now, the Spurs kept this one close early on, and Anderson was pretty good. He had 6 points, 9 boards, 5 assists, and was 3 of 3 on his field goal attempts, had a block as well, and easily smashed through his DFS value. We talked about him being a great option. Well, he returned over 10x worth of value on FanDuel, and that's exactly what you wanted, especially pretty good coming from a guy who had an 8% usage rate. John Simmons started also in place of Kawhi. He had 14 points with 5 assists in 34 minutes. Took a lot of shots, the equal most on the team. Didn't hit them all that well, just 7 of 17, the same as LaMarcus Aldridge, but a decent performance. I still don't think that Simmons is that good of a player. I think he gets overvalued by people, and I'm not a massive John Simmons fan. Manu was great, 21 points in 18 minutes for him, including a ridiculous nutmeg of David West at one point late in the game. He was fantastic, and at $3,000, he clearly brought that value back. While Aldridge, again, just another shitful performance, 18 and 5 in 28 minutes for Aldridge. 41% shooting on 17 attempts, has struggled so much since Kawhi has gone down, hasn't taken the opportunity to have that extra usage put onto him, and has done nothing with it, and just looks slow and lost defensively. He is getting killed. As for Pau, in his bench role, he played the same minutes that he played as a starter, 21 minutes for Pau, 12 and 10. He did play a lot down the stretch when the game was over, but it's a decent performance from Pau. Still don't think that he should be on the court really very much against this team. DeJounte Murray, 10 and 2 with 2 steals. Another good performance from him, while Patty Mills struggled once more, 7 points with 6 assists in his 33 minutes. I will not understand the Greg Popovich reluctance to use The Undertaker. It just makes no sense to me for Dwayne Dedmon. We talked about it before the series, how Dedmon, out of him, Lee and Gasol, had by far the best plus-minus against the Warriors during the season. His ability to actually be not a stiff defensively and not get toasted in pick and rolls and in space like Lee and Gasol would be something that I thought could get him onto the court. And then when David Lee went down after playing just 2 minutes, you thought, all right, cool, let's get some Dedmon in there. But no. Now, Greg Popovich is a great coach. We all love Pop. I love Pop. But he still is not immune to making dumb decisions. And this Dedmon thing continues to be a dumb decision. Dwayne Dedmon, as I've said many times, he was the 5th ranked player in defensive real plus minus in the entire NBA in the regular season, the 5th. But somehow, if he gets sick in the first round of the playoffs and has to miss a game, that's it. You're done. You're out of the rotation. You're not getting minutes. You're done. And it doesn't make sense to me that why you would play Lee and Gasol and Bertans and these guys over him. Either go small, play Aldridge at center, put Anderson in there, which he's loath to do at times, or Simmons, if Kawhi is available, or get Dedmon some minutes. We saw him play here in the second half, 7 minutes, 7 points, 4 boards, and a steal. You brought that DFS value back, but I'm not having any confidence that Dedmon's going to see the court in Game 4. I've been saying this since the Memphis series. Why the hell is Dedmon not playing? It makes absolutely no sense at all. And especially to me with Kawhi, you can say that Pop put this team into being a good defensive squad, and he did it with Gasol and Lee in that front court, and he did. But Dwayne Dedmon was a massive part of this defense in the regular season, and when you don't have Kawhi guarding the perimeter, Aldridge, Lee, Gasol, they are going to get toasted, and they have so many times. And it is just a bad decision. It's probably not going to change the series. It's almost definitely not going to change this. And it wouldn't have changed the series. But it still doesn't make it not a mistake. And that's something we do get caught up on so often. I talk about it all the time, about process over results. About, you can do the right thing, or you can do the wrong thing and it gets you a win. Doesn't mean it was the right decision to make. And even this, if you play Dedmon, they'd still lose. It doesn't make it wrong. I still think that he needs to play. Just my opinion. Davis Bertans, he had 20 minutes for 2 points, 4 rebounds and 2 steals. Not really understanding the 20 minutes. I like Bertans. I don't really understand giving him 20 minutes over a guy like Dedmon. And I think that's all. Danny Green looked a little bit proppy later on. Hurt his leg on a dunk attempt. 7 and 8 in 33 minutes for Dan. So that's the overall recap of Game 3. I don't expect Dedmon to become a big part of the rotation for Game 4. Someone said to me, Connor Varney, who works with the Locked On Podcast Network, are the Spurs potentially limiting Dedmon in order to reduce his market value during the offseason where he becomes a free agent again? And that's a common thing that gets thrown around by people. And you know my thoughts on this. It's like showcasing for a trade. If the other GMs don't know how valuable or what Dedmon is like as a player, and they base it on confusing rotational decisions in the playoffs, and they think, oh, well, he must be shit because he's not playing, then that's on them, and that makes them dumb. And with some of the decisions the GMs have made, drafting-wise, free agency-wise, trading-wise, yes, some of them are dumb. So that can't be ruled out, and maybe that's a possibility. That mindset absolutely baffles me to an extraordinary degree. That it's the opposite of showcasing for a trade. We'll hold this guy down so his value doesn't come out. People were saying the same thing for Nerlens Noel. You know who Nerlens Noel is. You know what sort of a player he can be. And if people are actually positing this out loud, or they didn't play him to hold his value back, then surely a GM sees through that. Surely it can't be that hard. I don't know. I'm not a GM. I never will be a GM, most likely. You never know. There's always a 0.0001% chance that somebody could get a job that they're unqualified for. But I have a feeling that some of this stuff that goes down is really confusing. It continues to baffle me, as we have mentioned plenty of times. Let's move on now to talk about what we hope will happen as we move forward. And we did talk about Boston-Cleveland Game 3 in yesterday's show, but there has been a change because Isaiah Thomas is now out for the rest of the playoffs with a labrum tear in his hip and impingement as well. I've had this injury myself. It's a prick. He played through it. Had happened back in March. Got really bad up in Game 7. Played through it Game 1 and 2. And struggling. He's out. The Celtics know they're cooked. And having a guy play through an impingement in his hip joint, which is a real prick. I said it, I had this injury. I had to have surgery on it myself. I heard it while I was skiing, landed on the hip, and it tore the labrum in there, and there was bone growth in the wrong positions. And every time you sleep, it's a pain in the ass. You run, it puts you completely out of whack. And I am far from an elite athlete. So anything that I did was just an absolute prick. Standing up, it was just like, my God, this hip, what the hell is going on? And that's what Thomas is dealing with now, probably to a much larger degree than what I've ever dealt with. So he's cooked. Let's talk about where this value really opens up now in this game. Marcus Smart at 5,100, almost a no-brainer to play. He will start. We saw during the season when Thomas was out that he put up pretty good numbers, and his assist numbers and his ability to create for others was actually a key feature of what he was able to do. So I imagine we saw Marcus Smart in the last game put up 22 points without hitting a single field goal. So you get some actual shots to go in, which maybe happens, maybe doesn't, or at least play more than the 25 minutes, which seems almost a certainty. He's going to beat that 5,100 value. Terry Rozier goes from a guy that gets 5 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes to a guy that's going to play 25. It's going to be a super aggressive rebounder. He's at 2,300. You have to love that. So having Smart as your shooting guard, Rozier as your point guard, and maybe paired with a Steph Curry or a Kyrie Irving in that backcourt, to me is a real smart option. The other guy who has to get more value is Jaylen Brown. He was already looking like a super play. He had 26 points in the last game in 24 minutes. He's a $2,100 player. And the reason, yes, the point guard's out and Jaylen plays the 3, but what it does is it takes Marcus Smart minutes away from the 3 and pushes them down to the 1. So there's more minutes there at the 3 or at the 2 for Jaylen, as Smart's minutes won't be played there. So that opens up even more playing time for Jaylen Brown. And having those 3 guys in a Smart, Rozier, Brown, Celtics triumvirate in your DFS lineup looks like a real strong way to go. Then you can supplement it with LeBron. You can put Steph, you can put Kyrie, you can put Kevin Love. You can put those guys in there And I think it really does start to take the shape of a really strong DFS lineup. Gerald Green, I'm not sure what they do now. I didn't know if he'd be able to manage sticking in the starting lineup, but without Isaiah in the lineup, we're going to get some minutes from Green. He's at 2,100. Jaylen Brown is by far the better option out of those $2,100 price guys on FanDuel. I don't think there's a huge amount of debate about that, but he does become more of an option than I would have considered him before. It feels pretty comfortable that the Cavs are going to win this game 3 by a considerable margin. They're 16.5 point favourite. So does that limit what LeBron can do at 12,500? Well, it does limit you a bit, but when you should be getting stacks of value from these $2,000 guys like Brown and like Rozier, and more value from Smart, and getting 5x out of LeBron at 12.5 is not everything that you need. If you get 58, which you got last game from him in 32 minutes, that's not an unrealistic expectation. We also have seen in blowouts before LeBron play 38 or 40 minutes, so don't be 100% thinking that that's not going to be the case. Kyrie at 88 as well. A little bit more uncertainty placed on him, but it's either him or it's going to be Steph Curry that you look at as that high-price point guard in this slate of games with Isaiah Thomas out. Al Horford at 8,000. I think that Al, if you have saved this money by going with that Brown, Rozier, Smart combo, and even you can include a Kyle Anderson in that cheap combo of guys who are around, because he looks like he's going to be a real solid option there for the Spurs as well. Then playing up to Horford at 8,000 is fine. Now you might say, he's not going to bring me value at 8,000. That's fine, but you got $3,000 left. You can move from Tristan Thompson at 5,100 up to Al at 8,000, who takes on the extra usage, takes on some extra ball handling and playmaking, and maybe drops you a 35, which isn't 5x value, but 35 is better than 35 at 4x value is better than 25 at 5x from Tristan Thompson if you've got those extra $3,000 around. So as much as I might not love Horford, I think that the way that everything else seems to be playing out, he's not going to be a horrendous option to put in there. So, and especially on DraftKings where he comes in at 6,800. Now those prices are a little bit different for these other guys on DraftKings. You've got Rozier at 2,700, still love it. Marcus Smart at 5,100, still love it. Jaylen Brown at 3,000, still love it. So even though they're not the 21s or 23s that you got in FanDuel, it doesn't matter. I still like all those guys a lot. The other guy I really like on DraftKings is Avery Bradley at 59. The 65 he is on FanDuel is still good, but 59 for Braddles over on DraftKings is strong, and having a him and Marcus Smart and Rozier and Brown combo is a real, having a lot of these Celtics guys, given their value, is, I think it's a decent proposition to go for. So that's how I see a lot of this changing based on Isaiah's absence. Kevin Carlson says, would you be against going with Smart and Bradley at shooting guard? Absolutely not. I completely go with that. Now, if you're talking FanDuel, the Bradley price isn't supreme. It's 6,500, but I reckon you'll have that cash left over by taking a Rozier or taking a Brown. And I think that having that combination of Bradley and Smart is far from a bad option. You're spending 11,600 on those two guys on FanDuel, and they could easily bring you back 60 points between the two of them, and that should be considered a pretty good win. So I think that's a great way to go about it. So yeah, thanks Kevin for that question, allowing me to clarify that. Let's move on now to Game 4 of the Warriors and Spurs series, and once one of these series is over, DFS is done. We realize this, that DFS is over once one of these series is finished. So Monday, it could be over. Monday could be your last DFS day if the Warriors happen to win Game 4. Now, I'm going to approach looking at this game by assuming that Kawhi Leonard will not play and David Lee will not play. I don't think that Pop is going to, in a 3-0 series, a guy battling injury who couldn't recover in 5 days off to play Game 3. I don't think that Pop is putting him out there for Game 4, so don't expect Kawhi out there. Let's look at the point guard. Shawnee Livingston didn't do a huge amount today. He's at 1,500. I think he's still a decent bet at that price. Obviously, you've got the Rozier option at the 2,300, which I feel is a superior play. But if you do need to cut back on salary, Livingston could be a guy there. I like DeJounte Murray at 2,600, so that's a GPP alternative to, say, a Rozier in that similar price range. I've liked what he's done. Without Kawhi, he should be getting those minutes, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him play even a 27-minute. If the game is done by halftime, you'll see lots of Murray to close out Game 4. So I like him from a GPP point of view. As for Steph at 10,000, it's not strong, and with Kawhi, You're most likely not there. There is that blowout possibility. But you're saving money in so many other spots that I don't hate it. I love it at 9,600 on DraftKings. I think it's a great spot for Steph over on DraftKings, but I'm not totally into it on FanDuel. And when I say I'm not totally into it, as I've said many a times, it just means I won't start my lineup with Steph. But I'd look around and go, well, I've got 10,000 left. Who else has given me that value at 10? It's probably going to be Steph because I've put my other guys that I want in. I've put my Smart in. I've put Brown in. I've put Rozier in. Who else fits it out? I've got my 10,000. Do I spend the 9,000 on Kyrie? Or do I take 10 on Steph? If you got the 10, you take Steph, in my opinion. And that's the way that I would be looking at it. So me not saying I don't love it doesn't mean that I wouldn't be using him. It means that he's not the guy that I go, bang, let's lock it in with Steph and build around it. And that's the difference. He's the guy that comes in later on if you can fit him in there and make that decision. On DraftKings, he comes closer to being a core guy at 9,600, but there is still that blowout risk for Game 4 if Kawhi is out, as we assume. Let's take a look at the shooting guard options in this one. Manu's at 3,000, obviously crushed it in this game, and we talked about it. You know, that 5 minutes he played in Game 2 was not something to pay too much attention to. He obviously well exceeded that, and I would have to say that Ginobili at 3,000 is another strong guy if you don't want to go, say, with that Smart Bradley combo. Putting Manu in there is going to be superior to, say, going to a J.R. Smith or a Kyle Korver or any of those sort of guys. Dan Green at 4,200 really doesn't do it for me, though. While Clay at 7,100, hey, multiple GPPs, that's it. I can't see any other rationale behind using Klay Thompson. On DraftKings at 6,000, Clay's a little bit different, but I still, you know, you got 5,900 for Avery. That's the way that I would head rather than Clay, but it can be a differentiation point in a GPP lineup on DraftKings, and he has more place on DraftKings than he does, say, on FanDuel. Pat McCaw at 3,500. Love Pat McCaw, but I don't like that salary. I don't really, you know, I've been super impressed with McCaw, but I just hate that salary price point for him. And he's at 2,000 on DraftKings, which is, it's a little bit better. It's definitely not, it's not supreme, but he had 12 points in today's game, and at $2,000, how do you complain about that? So wouldn't be against using Pat McCaw in Game 4 for the Warriors, assuming that, wouldn't have to assume anything. I think that he stays in the rotation and plays the 10 to 12 minutes that we saw from him today. Small forwards, Davis Bertans is at $1,300. He had 20 points in Game 3. That's a pretty good effort. He wasn't quite as successful in Game 2 he had 20 points. He wasn't quite as successful in Game 4. He only had 10 points. But at 1,300, you know what I'm going to say, that's a win. And I think that 1,300 for Davis is another one of these cheap guys that you can get in there. There's a bunch of cheap guys, which doesn't often happen in playoff DFS. Kyle Anderson at 2,500, I would be happy locking him in. Again, we're assuming Kawhi doesn't play, which I think is a fairly good assumption. So I think that that's a good spot. John Simmons at 4,300. I think that's a good price for John Simmons. I'm not sold on his upside, but I'm pretty bloody sold on his floor for cash at 4,300. I don't see any reason why I would dislike that. I dislike him on DraftKings a lot at 5,800. It's way too high. I want nothing to do with him at 5,800 over on DraftKings. But you can take a guy like Bertans over there for the 2,000 and again, feel pretty bloody good about it. And that becomes a good option, just that Simmons price. Or, you know, $1,500 more on DraftKings and FanDuel really takes him away. So he moves out of the player pool for me over on DraftKings. As for Kevin Durant, $10,000. Sure, if you don't want to go with LeBron, Durant is fine. He had another strong performance today. He dropped 50 points, and that's exactly where you want him to be. So I don't think you should feel too worried about using him on either FanDuel or DraftKings. Not saying that he's the strongest guy or the strongest play. He's in that Steph Curry mold that, hey, you want to fit him in, you fit him in. But I would much rather take LeBron in most cases because I've saved a lot of money in other spots and be able to fit the extra $2,000 for LeBron. But you might not be able to. And then Durant is clearly a fine option. Iguodala is not, so don't look too hardly there. Hardly, not the right word. 8,000 for LaMarcus Aldridge. Yeah, about that. That's probably a no from me. I would look at him as a tournament guy. He is, as the kids would say, shook. He is not handling Draymond Green. Remember when they first met up and he deleted all his social media accounts after Draymond killed him? It's getting back to that territory. He is in a world of hurt at the moment from Draymond. At 8,000, he would just be, hey, maybe he can be good, but that's where we're at. Maybe he can be good. At 78 on DraftKings, it's a little bit better, but I still don't feel I don't feel great about using him in cash. But again, you might be in that situation where you've just got shitloads of money left. And you go, what do I do here? Do I just leave $5,000 on the table, or do I take Aldridge and he won't get me 5x? He might get me 4x, but 4x at 7,800 is better than 6x at $4,000. And that's another way that you do need to really pay some attention there. Now, as for a guy like Pau Gasol, yeah, he came off the bench. He had a double-double, cool. But he's $6,100. So you should be looking at that and just dropping the old deal or no deal, no symbol, no deal symbol. That one, I think it is, even though that's the worst show on TV. Do you guys have Deal or No Deal in the States? We have it. It is the dumbest game show in the entire world. It is just ridiculously. But anyway, I'm getting onto a game show rant here. JaVale McGee, $4,000. Talked about him yesterday. Talk about him today. If Zaza's out, cool. But he still needs to have a really good game to break down some good value at 4,000. You know, Tristan Thompson at 5,100 is a much better option in my opinion. As for Pachulia at 4,000, same thing. I just don't love that salary sitting there for Zaza whatsoever. Yes, I get confirmation that Deal or No Deal is over there in the States. It is the most brainless game show of all time. Surely it is just the most luck-based game show I've ever seen. What skill or talent is there in that whatsoever? Apart from being able to make an absolute bell end of yourself on TV and do some sort of weird-ass, wacky, I'm a cocksucker type of dance. I apologize if any listeners to this show have been on Deal or No Deal. That's my bad. It is horrendous. Anyway, enough deal. That's where we're at in the NBA playoffs. We're talking Deal or No Deal and the ludicrous nature of that game show. We're done. That's it. I don't think we can talk about this anymore. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play, on TuneIn, and make sure, if you do like the show, leave a review. It's the best way that you can support the show. Another way you can support it is head to patreon.com/redrock_bball, and you can support an independent broadcaster like myself. $3 a month is the supporter level on there. That's not much. That's half a beer. That's a coffee for however many hours, like 30 hours of entertainment, maybe 20 hours of information and entertainment I provide a month. I think it's a pretty decent deal. And again, this podcast is always going to remain free, but thank you to everyone who has become a patron of the show. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Greg Popovich.